I'm really excited about today's conversation. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Does that work? Want to see that?
Yes, but you probably want to share. Well, okay.
Okay, so I'll give it a shot. So let's do introductions. My name is Nick Sinai. I'm a senior advisor with Insight. I've been with Insight since 2014. I help on all things public sector go-to-market and also with some of our government, defense, and dual-use investing on a handful of boards there. And I also teach at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I spent almost 6 years in the Obama administration. Over to you, Marina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marina Nitta. I worked with Nick. He was my first boss when I joined the federal government 10 years ago. I was a senior advisor on technology in the Office of Science Technology Policy in the Obama White House. I then became the chief technology officer of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for 5 years. These days, I do two things. I work on child welfare reform with a number of states, and I also do IT crisis consulting with large and corporate and sometimes state government.
So getting right into it, and I love the fact that we have people from around the globe today, just in the chat, in the comments. It's just fantastic to see so many interesting people. It sounds like we have both people from inside our portfolio, so some great companies, names I recognize, and some people outside of our portfolio, some entrepreneurs and executives and employees in great companies and other organizations around the world. So really fun to have you all here. Marina and I have been friends for about a decade. We had a chance to work together in the White House and have stayed friends ever since. And so, we've watched a lot of people in a lot of different organizations. I mean, she worked in education, White House, and VA. VA is a Fortune 10 size enterprise, but also in foster care and in small startups. And I've worked in consulting, in venture capital, at Harvard University, coming on up to a decade at Insight, working with a number of startups and scale-ups. And so we have so many different experiences. And so we really wanted to understand, like, why are people successful and why are they sometimes famously not? And we just had a bunch of tactics and stories that we wanted to share. And they span from White House to Google and Amazon to local government, to startups and so forth. And so there's just some commonalities about being effective. How do you kind of build some momentum and build some wins? And we think they're very, very relevant both inside the portfolio and for companies and organizations we hope to partner with. So, a big fan of put the bottom line up front. So, the book really kind of has six chapters, and it's about defining the problem, learning your organization or a partner organization. How do you pitch the solution? How do you start small but build momentum? How do you build a team? And how do you make things stick? And we wrote this, mostly for the context of someone inside a bureaucracy, big or small. But this is also very, very true for SaaS entrepreneurs, because at the end of the day, your customers, perhaps your investors, large partners, maybe suppliers, maybe regulators, they're all bureaucracies, or a lot of them have elements of being a bureaucratic system, right? And so how you fundamentally understand how they work, that's going to make you much more effective. And so the classic example would be if you're selling into enterprises, making sure that you really understand whether that's Fortune 500 companies or whether that's government. They are very clearly bureaucracies, and understanding them, understanding their goals, understanding the processes, and understanding the people is key to being effective if you're going to try and sell a software solution to them. And you know what? As you grow, you're going to be adding process too, and you may not see yourself as a bureaucracy. You may see that as a four-letter word, but at the end of the day, there is going to be some process, because you want to do things in a repeatable fashion, right? And you want to deliver quality results to customers and have great employee experiences, and that requires you thinking through these processes and designing them with care. And so there's a lot from our book, Hack Your Bureaucracy, that is very relevant to SaaS entrepreneurs. So we have 56 tactics and more stories than that, because many chapters have several stories. And so I thought what we would do is kind of run through 10 stories and tactics that you know, we picked out for you all. But we also want to make this a conversation, so please do put things in the chat and ask us questions, challenge us. Let's make this dynamic and fun. So Marina, I'm going to have you lead off on the first chapter, or the first tactic.
Yeah, looking between the silos. So I am biased. This is my favorite. And it's one that I use constantly in my IT crisis firefighting and foster care at the VA. You can use it in your homeowners association, and you can use it both inside your own org, and then as Nick is talking about, when you're trying to understand the bureaucracies that you're working with, the enterprises that you're trying to sell. And the idea here is that the older or the larger that an organization gets, right? We know what the silos are. There's going to be a department, and it's going to have a lot of organizational antibodies that are going to defend against change. And however, at the spaces between the silos where things are handed off, where things get passed on to the next step, there's often this tremendous wealth of opportunity for making change, for removing steps, for streamlining things, for changing data quality, whatever the issue is that you're trying to work on. And there's generally nobody there even paying attention, let alone trying to defend against changing things. And so it can be a real opportunity for making outsized impact. And the way that you go about this is not rocket science. You can do it no matter where you are in your organization. But the key is you have to follow a real person, a real customer, a real case from start to finish. This does not work if you go kind of abstractly through the steps of a process and ask people abstractly how it works. You have to follow something real. If it gets faxed, you show up on the other side of the fax machine. If it goes to the mailroom, you got to go to the mailroom. And that's where you're going to find the insight. A popular story that I have here in my foster care work is I was helping a state try to streamline its foster parent application process, which took hundreds of days, during which time little kids were literally sleeping in the office on the floor because they did not have families to go to. So it doesn't sound like a particularly sexy process of streamlining, but it had real implications for real kids. And so I'm following this real application from start to finish. And at a step, there is a woman who is showing me that she has to request the applicant's driving record from the DMV. And to do that, she pulled out a carbon copy form, which those of you who are not familiar with it, it is like a multi-color piece of paper. You have to press really hard with a pen to imprint on the layers below. And she's like, I have to get a stamp. I have to get an envelope. This is so inefficient. Why does the DMV live in the 19th century? And I did something that this employee was not empowered to do, which is I then went over to the DMV and I said, hey, can you show me how you're processing driving record requests? And the woman there said, oh yeah, I pull up my electronic system, I get the requests in here on the left, and then I answer them in the same day. And I said, well, wait a minute, where does the carbon copy paper come in? And she said, oh, you were at child welfare. Those people live in the 19th century. Why do they keep sending me this stupid carbon copy paper? And why won't they just email me like everybody else? And so in one afternoon, I was able to eliminate this step that everybody hated, that nobody realized was a broken handoff. And it shaved 32 days off the foster parent application process. So there are going to be so many opportunities when you're trying to understand the enterprises you're trying to partner with, grow, or sell to, where you're going to have insight as a potential customer or a potential buyer that you can highlight to them of where your product or service can help fix some of those broken handoffs inside the silos. And you may be surprised at how quickly they can innovate in that space. Nick?
Well, there's a comment in the chat about homeowners association. And I'm wondering, Marina, if you could actually, we're just kind of riffing in real time here, but homeowners associations is something that you were passionate about as we were writing this book, and saying, hey, you know, they are bureaucracies too, and you wanted to make this book not just useful for the business persona and for the government and military persona, but also for the person who is trying to figure out their HOA or PTA or something like that. And I think you have a couple great stories in the book about it.
Yeah, so one of them is as Nick just said, we wanted to really make sure these tactics worked everywhere. And so we deployed some people to try them out on the homeowners association. And one particular case was about somebody wanted their pool to reopen and it had been closed during the pandemic. And so we suggested they use the tactic of pick up a pen, which is somebody's got to write a new policy for the pool. You should do it. And then if other people want to keep it closed, the bar is now that much higher. They're going to also have to write a pitch, and they're going to have to socialize it to get the pool to stay closed. And that worked really, really well. And so people's pools were back open. They're sending us pictures of themselves poolside. But this can also be, so we generally have the position that bureaucracies are everywhere. We are all in all bureaucracies everywhere, and you cannot get rid of them or blow them up or go around them. Sometimes you can go around them once and then you get caught and then you can't do that again. But HOAs might be an example of where you might want to get yourself on the board and then disband the entire thing, because you may learn that the history of your HOA was to keep Black and brown people out of your neighborhood by using rules about hedge height as an excuse to kick people out. And if that's the case, maybe you want to disband your HOA altogether. Please let me know if you need help with that. We would love to support.
So moving on, I think we're going to try and get through 10 tactics here. But keep the comments and questions going in the chat. So tactic 2 is about playing the newbie card. We see this with executives that came into the White House. We saw this at VA, I've seen this in the Department of Defense, but I also see this in all kinds of organizations. Startups and scale-ups, if you're an executive, you don't normally have like a 90-day listening tour because you got to get stuff done. And so the organization also isn't that big, but new CEOs in our companies do spend some time with the employees and with customers as quickly as they can in those first few weeks to really listen. And I think there's something really powerful about asking questions. And the longer we're in an organization, the more you're afraid to kind of ask those questions, or everyone assumes, especially if you're a mid-career or senior, everyone assumes that you may know certain things. And so we're big fans of using the newbie card, playing the newbie card, continuing to ask questions when you don't know the answer. And I think it shows a vulnerability and a humanness, but it also uncovers assumptions that need to be challenged. And that's true in a 100-person or 50-person startup. It's true in a 500-person scale-up, but it's also very true in a 400,000-person government agency. And so we're big fans of playing the newbie card and finding ways to do it over and over again. So can you bring in new energy? Can you or new people? Sometimes using fellows or consultants or entrepreneurs in residence. Is there a way to continue to do that and to not be afraid yourself? That is, challenge yourself to keep asking those questions, or put yourself because then you'll realize that other people will also have the courage to ask those questions. Okay, tactic number 3. Over to you, Maria.
Yeah, figuring out the real org chart. So we've all seen org charts, right? And they mean something. They mean who maybe fills out your performance review, or who maybe is responsible ultimately for someone's raises or promotion cycle. But in terms of power dynamics and who's making decisions, the org chart, it generally does not reflect how that works. And it's really important to understand the org chart that you're actually trying to navigate, whether this is your own organization, when you're trying to partner with, or when you're trying to sell to. And we don't mean for this to sound overly manipulative, because that's not really the plan, but it's to really understand, okay, this is the decision-making process. This is the buying process. These are the people that are going to weigh in on it, whether formally with a vote or informally by having their opinion sway other people. And then what are those individuals incentivized by? What do they consider risky? And this may seem like a lot of research work to do, but it really, really, really helps, because then you lay out the actual sort of map of who you're going to need to persuade, whose vote you might not need at all, and then who you can win over in other ways. In terms of speaking about votes that you may not need, one fun story from the VA that I had is I was trying to get our IT department to deploy changes to our website every day, which to this audience probably does not sound all that often, but at the time VA updated its websites quarterly, so once every 3 months. And the change management team was vehemently against the idea of this daily update, because they were like, how could we possibly review the changes in time? And they fundamentally did not trust anything like CI/CD tools or automated testing or anything. They only trusted reading the changes with their eyeball. And I tried basically every tactic we have in this entire book to persuade them. I took them to lunch. I befriended them. I tried to teach them about new tools, on and on and on and on. And they just absolutely would not approve. And every time I put this up for a vote, they would take 2 weeks right back and say, we vote no. But then at one point it occurred to me that I did not need them to vote yes. I just needed them to vote. And so I offered to include an automatic no vote as part of my CI/CD pipeline. So every time we deployed code, it would say in writing that this team had denied the push, did not approve it. And therefore, if something happened, they wouldn't be on the hook for it. And they loved this idea. They were very into it. So I was able to get my daily CI/CD pipeline in place by automating the no vote. So there may be some creative ways as you really learn how the org chart works, how the decision-making process works, that you can actually use it to your advantage to get to the sale or the decision that you need. Nick?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this for enterprise selling, right? And so yes, you kind of have to know the real org chart, but you have to know the formal org chart, but you also have to understand, who controls the budget, who's the influencer, who's the person who's going to cause trouble, who's going to leave soon, all of those kinds of things, and whether you use Medic or whatever your enterprise selling framework is. And our sales centers of excellence works closely with a number of portfolio companies on this. But understanding that is so key if you're going to come in there and make a sale. And this is true also, I think, for investors, right? If you're trying to navigate a larger venture or private equity firm, or partners, if you're trying to do a big business deal, understanding kind of what really drives them and who really has the say, and how the decisions really get made. I know that's hard, and that's a lot of discovery for startups and scale-ups when you're outside of an organization. But that's what talented salespeople and talented entrepreneurs have to do if they really want to make the sale. Okay, act as if. So this is one of my favorite tactics, and this is something that you all know very well. And so I talk about this in the context of making stone soup. So stone soup is a European folk tale about a traveler who comes to a village and asks for food. He's quite hungry, and the villagers don't give him any food. And so he sets up a big pot, and he fills it with water, and he puts a single stone in it. And a curious villager comes by and says, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm making this delicious stone soup. It's going to be just so tasty. And he goes on and on about this just fantastic stone soup. And the villager's a little perplexed, but is intrigued. And the traveler says, well, I just need a little bit of carrot. I think it could use a little bit of carrot, but it's going to be fantastic. And the villager shares a little bit of carrot. And this kind of happens over and over as he kind of convinces other folks to put in other vegetables, meat, salt, etc. And at the end, he removes the stone, of course, and shares the soup with the village. And so some people see this as a folk tale about sharing, about community, but I really see it as a folk tale about entrepreneurship and social proof. And whether you have a startup or a scale up of your own, or whether you're inside a large organization trying to start an initiative, this idea of who's that first villager who's going to give you that social proof, that carrot that actually turns it from just stone and water to now it's got a little bit of flavor. And I think it's all of our jobs, whether you are entrepreneurs or if you're starting something inside of an organization, is to act as if and tell the story of the delicious stone soup, and get some of that early social proof that lets you kind of build that momentum. In the book, we tell the story. I had started something called the Green Button Initiative, which is basically getting a bunch of electric utilities to make energy data available in machine readable and human readable formats back to their consumers, back to their customers. And the only challenge here is the White House didn't have any, and really the federal government didn't have a lot of authority, because this was something that state governments regulate electric utilities. But understanding the dynamics between the regulators and the utilities, we essentially got them in a room, got them excited about a pilot, and said, look, the White House will celebrate you if you can get just a very rudimentary download pilot done in 90 days. And they committed to do that. We celebrated that public commitment, another tactic in our book. And then, the enthusiasm by consumers who are actually getting their energy data and able to use that with third-party energy efficiency or other energy apps, solar, et cetera, helped show the value there. So I'm a big fan of act as if, but I don't need to tell all of you because entrepreneurship fundamentally is act as if. Tactic 5.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people approach bureaucracies, big organizations, whatever it may be, with a belief that there are lots of people around who are going out of their way to block you, to stop you, to slow you down. And I think it's a lot more productive to approach it as though there are lots of people in the organization or the enterprise who are hidden there to help you. And it's your job to find them. And this tactic is a nod to Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. In that book, a Karass is a number of people who have been hidden around the earth by God to accomplish a mission together. We use the term more secularly in our book, but I think it's just generally a healthier way to approach an environment, which is cultivating your Karass. Who are the people around in other organizations, in your organization, in customers and partners that you can work with together to accomplish a goal? And these can often be in very unexpected places. So probably the most unexpected place I found some members of my Karass was early in my career at the VA. Being the chief technology officer of a Fortune 10 equivalent company may sound like it came with a whole lot of resources and headcount. But in fact, I had a $0 budget and zero headcount free when I showed up to take over the job. And so my first opportunity to get some budget, to get a multi-million-dollar budget, was going to be from shutting off a particular IT contract. But in order to do this, I had to move 1,000 pages of HTML off of the old site and onto a new one. It doesn't sound like the biggest deal, but I had nobody around to help me and not enough hours in the day for me to do that by myself. And I'm telling this story to Simon, the security guard on the 12th floor, when suddenly it occurs to me that the security guards all have computers and have a little bit of time on their hands. And so I invited them all to a lunch where I would teach them HTML and would, continually coach them and tutor them in it if they could help me move these 1,000 pages. Almost all of them signed up. They came to my lunch and learned. They learned HTML. They moved all the pages across, beat the deadline. I ended up with a multi-million-dollar IT budget for the first time. The VA lost some security guards because they ended up going into IT jobs. But I found that they had been such an amazing part of my Karass that I would not have expected. And then the VA also taught me another part of my Karass was really the executive secretaries, who, as you guys all probably know, are the ones that have real control in any organization. And so befriending them became a really big part of my ability to get things done in the organization. And then you can make this kind of fun. We called our Karass at the VA the Grilled Cheese Club, and we would make grilled cheeses, definitely violating fire codes, on George Foreman grills in the office once a month. And we would give demos of kind of what our team was up to, what our goals were. And this had a few impacts. I mean, one, it's nice to recognize people and bring them together and eat grilled cheese. It helped because they then were up to date on the latest that we were up to. And sometimes if you think about when people are trying to stop your project, it also helped that they knew the latest that we were not up to, right? And they were ultimately in a lot of meetings and places that I wasn't going to be able to be because the laws of physics only allow me to be in one place at once. And so they could advocate for us, they could answer questions, they could make clarifications. And then also depending on who they were, maybe they were HR, maybe they were lawyers, maybe they were a particular kind of lawyer, they could weigh in with their perspective and expertise and say, hey, I see that you're doing this. Have you talked to this person? Have you considered this thing? You might be able to do it this way to kind of get around this rule or this complication. And so cultivating the Karass can be really, really powerful. And we just really want to encourage you to think outside the box about where your Karass may be hidden. Nick?
Yeah, I see this in so many different contexts with our portfolio. So in one context, you will watch successful AEs, account executives, salespeople, who will have customers who they will follow around. They're part of each other's Karass. And so you will see, as that account executive has a 30-year sales career, and as that technology executive has a 30-year technology career, they will sell to each other as they kind of move organizations. And because they respect each other, they trust each other, and there's that authentic connection. And so that it's interesting to see that. You also see with exciting executives who will bring people, it could be engineers or salespeople with them, because that's part of kind of their craft, and people want to follow them from company to company. So we're big fans of thinking about this, both in kind of traditionally, who's in your function, but also outside of the functional area. I love Marina's story about teaching the IT guards or the security guards, how to code in HTML and help her transfer web pages. Bill in the chat has a really great comment here about we've already tried that kind of approach, right? And I think when you're talking inside an organization, or you're working inside a large organization, you're going to find people who have tried something and failed, right? And if you can make them part of your carouse, whether if you're inside a large bureaucracy, then and say you're trying to get something done, or if you're trying to sell into a bureaucracy, or trying to make a rule change at a regulatory place, or whatever you're trying to get done outside of the bureaucracy, if you can befriend them, and that may not be natural for you. That is, you may be thinking, well, I have this cool solution, this cool technology, I want to sell to the people who are most naturally going to embrace it. But the people who have been burned in the past, if you can get them on board, and that's not easy, but then you're going to have a real powerful and more durable chance of your solution not just being sold, but actually being successful. And that's ultimately, what builds enduring companies is not just getting the sale, but delivering a solution that is differentiated and everyone is excited about, because it's solving a massive customer problem, and you continue to earn your right in kind of these more recurring revenue models. So finding those people who have tried it before and failed. In fact, Marina, if you wouldn't mind, you have a great story about that from the VA.
Oh yeah. So early on in my time at the VA, I got asked to come to a meeting, and the meeting was about this amazing idea someone had that a veteran should be able to update their mailing address in one place instead of, at the time, 83 different places. And so everyone in this meeting is excited, they're on board, they're thinking, oh man, this would be such a better, obviously, right, experience for veterans and interaction with the VA. We should totally do this. After the meeting, the head of the executive secretary pool popped her head in my office, and she said, hey, Marina, I have something to show you, come with me. And I went to her office, where there was a shelf of 18 binders. And each of those binders was from a project that had previously tried to solve this exact problem and failed. And so I was able to go back through the more recent binders and say, like, oh, these people are still here. We should probably go talk to them and understand what went wrong. And the long story short of what went wrong 18 times in a row was that the VA kept trying to solve it with a whole hog, big bang approach. They were going to have multiple years of gathering the exact requirements of the exact address in the exact database, 83 different places. And then they were going to have one master solution that magically did all of those things, usually with the enterprise service bus, which is terrifying. And it never worked. What worked the 19th time, and what works today, where a veteran can update their mailing address in one place, is instead they did two, right? And then they added a third, and then they added a fourth. And therefore they were able to kind of address changes in small enough bites that they could iteratively keep rolling out the changes. But we learned that insight because Bonnie had kept those 18 project binders. And so there's really tremendous value in talking to the people that have tried it before, understanding what went wrong, and then seeing if they have an idea of what they do differently, or if conditions maybe have changed and they think it's worth trying again.
Okay, tactic number 6, make it easy for the other person. And so we talk about this in the book in the context of if you're making an ask of somebody, you want an introduction into another part of your organization or a different agency. You want to make it easy for that person. You want to ghostwrite that email. You want to just make it simpler for the other person to help you, because people have good intentions. And if you have a meeting with someone and they say they want to do something, but they don't magically follow up, or very few people do. And so, doing the hard work to make it really easy for that person to help you is just super powerful. And I think that's true anytime you're navigating a complex process, and that could be, if you are updating your investor or pitching a new investor, right? Are you not only thinking about the person that you're pitching, but also the people that they are trying to convince in the organization? It's true from a customer perspective too. Maybe the customer has to write a justification about why they are going to use you rather than do a full and open competition, or why they're paying a premium for your product versus a competitor's. And if you make it easy for that other person, it's just that much more powerful. Tactic 7. Tailor your pitch. Over to you, Maria.
Yeah. So this is the idea, and I think this is probably familiar to many of you in selling, that whatever your pitch is for the project and the outcomes that you want to be, it's not going to be the same to all people. If you're pitching someone that is in legal, for example, you're probably going to want to highlight how you're operating within the lines, or you've taken into account their particular policy or regulation, and making sure that they know that you heard their needs and you met them. Similarly, if you're talking to someone that's budget conscious, you're going to want to make sure that you're pointing out how your solution is more cost effective, perhaps over the long term. This is really part of a corollary to the map and understanding the real stakeholder and org chart that we talked about earlier, which is when you understand everybody's risks and incentives, you're going to want to pitch them in a way that addresses their risks so it doesn't seem risky to them, and then it meets their incentives for recognition, for money, for resources, for change, whatever that may be. And so just thinking strategically as you are working on your pitch that it's going to change for different audiences, and being okay with that. I think this can be sometimes frustrating, right? We all have way more work than we can put on our plate, and we want to have like the perfect pitch that meets everybody's needs. And when you try to do that, ultimately it can fall flat for everybody. So having the like slightly different one page, or the slightly different slide deck, the slightly different pitch for different audiences can really help you bust through bureaucracy as much as it is more work. Nick.
Yeah. Tactic 8, pilot is the password. It seems kind of silly to tell entrepreneurs about the power of pilots, but we have a really great story in the book, which I can't help but telling. And it's the story of Enrique Odi, kind of a fast talking lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And I first met Enrique when we went to a retirement ceremony together of a 3-star general. And these are like big weddings. This is in Andrews Air Force Base, in this huge hangar, and it's like 1,000 people and bands and formal. And here he is, just working the crowd, begging for funds and permission and forgiveness, and just he saw that ceremony as a chance to get work done. Enrique actually was so frustrated with the Air Force that he cold called the CIO and said, you don't know me, sir, but I think we're not doing software right. And he basically asked for $100,000, which the CIO gave him, and he started a pilot to reimagine the entire aircraft operating center, basically the software that runs how the planes fly in the Air Force. And he got this call from his boss, Raj Shah, who was traveling with Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, who was on the Defense Innovation Board, and he was in Qatar. And he said, there's a whiteboard here where they are scheduling tankers, those huge planes that fly around, and that fundamentally is a software can fix that. And so Raj, said, hey, instead of trying to reimagine this entire suite of software, which really was a multi-million-dollar kind of thing, and it was many modules, and it was a large defense contractor like a Raytheon or someone like that, Lockheed or someone like that, had been building this over many years. Raj said, hey, why don't you just work on this little scheduling piece? So it wasn't particularly sexy. They said, why don't you pivot inwards to the little thing, and we'll put in $1 million and we'll get it done. And Enrique recruited a few airmen who knew how to code, and within 4 months they actually were able to get working prototypes in front of airmen, and within 6 months back out in the field in Qatar. And that's record time in a bureaucracy like the Air Force, where it's so hard to get working software, especially in the field, in operational contexts. because there's just so many layers of security and other testing review. But because it was actively needed, because it was out in the field, and because they started and pivoted to such a small thing, they were able to get going. That actually was the genesis of Kessel Run, which is the Air Force's flagship software factory, actually located here in a Boston WeWork of all places. 1,200 people. They are shipping software and delivering software, so it's true DevOps inside of the Air Force. And it's a great example of pilot released the password that is, Newbie never would have been successful reimagining the entire AOC, the entire set of software to manage how the Air Force tasks and manages planes in the air. That was a fool's errand. But by starting smaller with that little pilot, no pun intended, that little prototype of scheduling tankers, he was able to get that into the field and show just tremendous enthusiasm for a better way to not only build but also deliver in a more continuous fashion software. So I'm a big fan of this, and you don't have to be a fast-talking colonel. You retired at colonel. You don't have to be a fast-talking colonel in the Air Force to do this. I think any entrepreneur can show what they mean and get that rapid feedback, even if the back end or the entire product isn't built so great. I think there's a lot of great commentary on the web about how you can get MVPs in front of customers and get real feedback that's going to inform kind of what you're actually building and what you're not.
Yeah, and Bill in the chat, you said a light bulb moment highlight as a shibboleth. Yeah, we actually have a chapter in the book called Use a Thesaurus. And we have a section from our friend Dave Carino on how he learned when he was trying to help a state revamp their food stamp program that he was using a particular word that was very scary to them because it was very tightly associated with their previous failure, and how naming that and then picking a different word really worked. And as a small example of that too from the VA, if you had a defect in your IT system, which could include like a typo on your website, it triggered this whole horrible defect process with like everybody on a phone call, and it went on for hours. But if we called it a revision or an iteration, we could avoid that entirely. And so we were like, oh no, this is not a defect. This is just an iteration. And it really helped jump through a lot. Yeah, so leveraging the big bosses. So we have a belief in the book that we try to walk through that bureaucracies are not top-down places. Just because the CEO, or in our case, the President of the United States, says something that will happen does not mean that it will happen. And Nick loves for me to tell this particular story of how President Obama was mad at me. When I was at the VA, we were trying to solve this very specific tech problem, which was at a certain step in the appeals process, a number of veterans fell through the step and never made it over to the next step. And the simple way to figure out how many veterans had fallen through, right, would be to compare the veterans in the first system with the veterans in the second system, and then the delta would show us who the missing veterans were. But I had been going on 9 months and had not been able to connect those two computers, because to do that, I had to fill out a bunch of IT paperwork that I was really struggling to get through. One of the forms required me to swear that I had jiggled the doorknob of the cloud to confirm that it was locked. And I think this audience probably knows the cloud does not have a doorknob, so that was a little bit hard to work through. And I tried explaining that I metaphorically jiggled the doorknob, and then they kicked the paperwork back to me. I tried writing not applicable, they kicked the paperwork back to me. I tried leaving it blank, kicked the paperwork back to me. And so it was becoming increasingly clear to me that what I had to do was change the paperwork itself, which itself was a process. And so I find myself called into a cabinet meeting with President Obama, which is a meeting where usually nobody but the head of the head of the agency is invited. And he expresses his displeasure with the progress that I was making in the VA, but he wanted to help and he offered to help. And he said, hey, these people won't let you have passwords to that second computer. What if I, the President of the United States, record a video telling them that they need to give you the password? And the thing is, like, that wasn't going to work. Like, the person in charge of the password was only going to give it to me if we completed the IT paperwork completely and thoroughly, right? Not, there was no spot on the form that says, like, this is not applicable because the leader of the free world said that I didn't have to do this part. And so that really taught us, me, the power of the bureaucracy itself, and how even the most powerful man in the world could not get through the IT paperwork, and that we really had to change the forms themselves. The counter to that, though, is that like you can definitely leverage the big bosses for a lot of things. They can get excited about your idea. The more that they're read in on it, the more that they can incorporate it in things they're working on, like their strategic plans or their vision. Their excitement can get other people to prioritize and pay attention to your project, your efforts, the resources that you need. So there's lots of ways that you can leverage the big bosses. We want to encourage you not to think about getting things done as a top-down mandate, but through top-down support and excitement, and to include air cover, which can help you if there's some gray area, help you navigate the gray area. But top cover, air cover will not help you get through the IT approval forms. You have to actually just fill them out. Nick, are you on mute?
I am. I still make those fails to this day. So I spent 4 years in the White House as a staffer, and it seemed like just about every day somebody would come to us, either inside the administration, in an agency, or many times outside of government, saying, "Well, the president should do this. The president should issue this executive order. The president should blah blah blah." And you'd hear it every day, and it really kind of informed how we thought about the world, which is, yeah, it would be great maybe if the president issued that executive order or that thing, but what are the conditions on the ground that are going to force his or her hand, right? Make it so compelling as an industry, as a movement, as whatever the thing is, that the president is going to want to take credit for it, or show that change needs to be done and is being done in your agency, so that we want to replicate that change across the entire federal executive branch, right? And take it to Congress and ask them to change the law, right? And so we would always turn it around in a really hopefully authentic way of saying, like, well, we can try and put that in the queue and see, work that into our bureaucratic process. But what are you doing to build this into a larger movement and make this a success? And so I'm a big fan of, yes, let's get some top cover. Yes, it's helpful to get your CEO or your customer's CEO excited about your product or initiative or whatever you're trying to get done. But ultimately, it is up to you. And the more that you can kind of force his or her hand, the more that they are going to be excited to buy your product or codify that policy or whatever that big change in the world you want. So the last tactic we have here is sell, baby, sell. And there's a whole chapter in our book about how enterprise selling, which many of you do, is related to getting stuff done inside a large organization. And maybe it's because I spent so much time with our go-to-market teams, especially those public sector focused, on government and federal and state and local governments, that I just have observed, how they see the world. And I think back to my time in government, and when I saw great bureaucracy hackers like Marina and kind of how they saw the world. And fundamentally, there's a series of parallels that may not be obvious, but are really fascinating. So just to give you a couple examples, a great salesperson is qualifying all the time. That is, they are talking to prospects and trying to understand, do they have the pain? Do they have the need? Do they have the budget? Do they have the urgency? All those kinds of things, and really trying to move them through a multi-step process, right? So you start with a funnel of lots of prospects and few customers at the end. Even in a environment where you may only have fewer kind of large named accounts, you're still qualifying your time of who am I going to spend time with today and this week based upon the size of the deal, their interest and their budget and kind of the fit with their particular legacy solutions, what have you. And that same thing is true when you had great bureaucracy hackers like Marina and many of the people we write about in the book, that how they spent time qualifying. You could spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people in an organization and go nowhere. So you really wanted to make sure that you were seeing if people were legitimately interested. and finding ways to qualify them. So there, the other thing about a sales process is, you're always telling that story inside of a prospect, and even once you've closed the sale, post sale, that's a story as you continue to communicate the value of the product. And I think that's true when you're trying to transform the VA or just change a small form inside of a large bureaucracy, right? Is how do you continue to tell that story in a way that has a powerful narrative, that has kind of those simple facts, and is bulletproof. And the way that it can be bulletproof is one of the things we counsel in the book is how do you workshop with your colleagues as you build momentum. And I think that's true in any sales process too. So if you are selling to investors, well, yeah, maybe you start with your insiders or your angel investors, and you workshop, your pitch deck with them before you go out to new investors. Same thing is true probably for a greener account exec of trying out your pitch and working on internally a little bit before you're put in front of real customers. So there's this great parallel between people who are trying to get stuff done inside large organizations and people who are trying to sell to customers or to investors in startups and scale-ups. And as our friend Kumar Garg likes to say, sales is a terminal position. That is, university presidents, President of the United States, your CEO, they're all fundamentally selling. And so it's a really important skill set, regardless of whether you're at a startup or scale-up, or whether you're inside a organization of massive size. So we have a little bit of time left, and I thought we might hit some of the questions and comments, if that works for you, Marina.
Yeah, so I think we got one question, not specific to any tactic yet, but as a startup, how do you avoid bureaucracy creeping into your org? This is one I think we've gotten a lot on the book tour. I think we have kind of a two-part answer, which is one, we consider bureaucracy to be more of a neutral term, understanding that a lot of people consider it to be a four-letter word. And so you are a bureaucracy already. You have two employees or one employee plus you. But I think the real question here is like, how do you keep your bureaucracy from getting in the way of your progress? And I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. Going back to the tactic we talked about looking between the silos. So often decision-making processes are not designed at all, or a process that impacts your customers or your clients is not designed at all, or nobody owns it end to end. And in our world, product management has a lot more prevalence than perhaps in the government. But I think having people that own end-to-end processes, that have KPIs that are focused on what you want to be focused on, whether that's your customers or customer service or timeliness or efficiency or whatever it may be. I think having those end-to-end process and product owners, having clear KPIs, and understanding and articulating what your decision-making process actually is and checking back on that. Because even if you have one, written down, it may be that people really do understand that, like, yeah, this is technically how the vote works, but how the vote really works is that you got to get, Bob out to lunch ahead of time and get him over to your side. And so being cognizant of how your decision-making process actually works would be a good tactic to help make your bureaucracy work more effectively too. Nick, anything to add on that?
No, that's great. Well, I would say that I'm a big fan of thinking about transparency and the way you work as a way to reduce bureaucracy as you grow, because we kind of as we grow, we tend to build our functional areas, our sales, our marketing, our legal, et cetera. And so the transparency, not only up the chain, but also across silo, that can slow organizations down really quickly, especially as you go from 50 to 150 to 300 kind of people. And so just being very, we talk about this a lot in that oftentimes organizations aren't designed. And so being very, taking a designer's mindset when you scale from 50 to 100 about things that maybe is mundane about how you communicate, how you work, how you report progress, how you scrub people in. I'm a big fan of kind of asymmetric information flow, because people may be an expert on something, but are heads down on something else, right? And yet it's helpful for them to know what's going on. There is a question, this is a very important question. Why 56 tactics?
That was how many we had. There's no other secret information besides that. That is how many we had.
Well, I would add to that we attempted to get down to 50, but we felt we were cutting good stuff, and our publisher and our agent said, you know what, no one's going to buy the book, whether it's 56 or 50. 50 would have been a nice round number, but we felt like we still had more to say, so it ended up with a funny number, and but that's all good. Let's see if there's any other questions here.
I see one. How do you get over a senior person who's part of a decision team and refuses to get over the process they created because they believe it's contemporary and you know that it's not? That is a great question, and it is a hard one. I think you need to understand what that person's risks and incentives are and wonder if you could agree on some success metrics up front with them, that they're like, yes, absolutely, we want, you know, this NPS score, this speed, this cost, whatever that may be, and then see to what extent you might be able to pilot or prototype or whatever the source word you need to use in your organization, a different path forward. You should definitely consult other people that have worked with this person, either longer than you have or in different capacities, to understand if there may be a history, like when have they changed their mind before? What were the conditions? And then what are they looking for? Like, are they stuck in their ways because they're afraid if things change, they will move from being senior to a newbie, which is a pretty hard thing to sell people on, right? Are they afraid because they don't actually really understand the new thing? This is something we encountered a lot in government, where unlike perhaps our field, it was very common to be an IT leader without having any IT background. And so we had to be very careful and thoughtful that if we were proposing something like an API policy, right, to a lay person, an API sounds like, wait a minute, you're going to connect to my computer and suck private data out of it? Like, that's horrible. I'm scared of that. I'm not going to approve that at all. And so we had a colleague who set up these very, very genius sessions called APIs for executives, made sure they were in like a fancy room. It was only executives that were invited to it. And then in that session, they would begin with, you know, we know everybody here knows what APIs are, but just in case, APIs are, and then did real basic 101 stuff, not patronizing them, not making fun of them, not putting them on the spot at all. That was not the goal. The goal was to give them a safe space to learn so that they could make an informed decision and maybe agree to some of the changes that we needed them to make. So that's some tactics I'd say there.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, can you introduce them to a more modern process in other ways than just telling them that their current process is wrong or outdated, right? So it's like, who do they listen to? Who do they respect? How do they consume information? You know, where sometimes there's outside organizations that have undue influence. And so saying, well, you know, this organization does it that way, they may see that as, oh, well, that's a more cutting edge organization. And if that's a business practice or an ops practice that they use, then maybe they're more open to it. So sometimes it's very much in the framing here. There's a question, any tactics about dealing with egos?
I think to the extent you can, you got to leverage the ego. So if they want the attention, how can you give them credit for what you're designing? How can you give them credit for a win? How can you let them, like, the sun shine on them? Because ultimately, if you want your thing to see the light of day and be successful, it may be that giving away the credit to the person with ego is one way to go about it. It doesn't feel great. I think I would acknowledge that, but you got to keep reminding yourself, like a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, that it ultimately what matters is getting the change or across the finish line or the project launched. It's less about, you know, not giving as much credit to the ego person that they maybe technically deserve. And there's a Q&A in the Q&A box. It says, read the newbie card. Are there pitfalls in leaders asking questions a few years into their role, and how do you avoid these?
Let's say that again. I'm sorry.
With the newbie card, are there pitfalls in leaders asking questions a few years into their role, and how do you avoid these?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of people flow. How do you bring new energy? And that can be fellows or interns, executives or entrepreneurs and residents. But there's also the tactic of board advisors or management consultants. There's a lot of different ways to bring kind of newbie energy to an organization who can ask questions. But I also think it's something that we can all aspire to do and practice. I think it's something you have to consciously do is continue to ask questions, even when you feel like it's making you vulnerable. And the more that I spend time with my professional heroes, and I watch them in board meetings and other contexts, they are unafraid to ask what seems like a dumb question and admit that they don't know something. And so, I'd encourage everybody on this call to kind of use your inner newbie and don't lose it, even if you've been in an organization for a while.
Yeah, we have the story of a teacher, an elementary school teacher in our book that says that whenever a new teacher joins, all the senior teachers load them up with the questions that they've been too afraid to ask.
So we're just about out of time here. A big thank you, Marina and Insight for hosting this. Thank you for everyone who joined inside the portfolio, for those companies that we hopefully will partner with one day. So those entrepreneurs and executives and people in fast-growing software companies, we excited to connect with you. I hope you got inspired by the book, because we did write it for everybody. It's available on Amazon or wherever you find books. We also have some additional content at hackyourbureaucracy.com. Thank you again for everyone today.
Thanks, everybody.